before Reverend Silas Vane lost his church, before Sheriff Abel Cross lowered his badge in front of the town, and before 7 mission records were read aloud with children's names crossed out by the same hand, there was only a starving coyote outside a schoolteacher's door. Its name would come later. At first, Eliza Hart called it nothing. Most of Mercy Bend called it dangerous. It was lean, dust-colored, and ugly with old pain. One ear had been split nearly in half. A trap scar circled its back leg, so every step came with a hitch, as if the earth charged it a price for walking. It did not beg. It did not trust. It only appeared at dusk, standing beyond Eliza's fence with something small clenched in its jaws. The town said Eliza imagined meaning, because she had lost too much. She had lost her classroom. She had lost her good name. Years before that, she had lost Thomas Wren, the only man who ever believed her questions were worth asking. So when a wild animal began leaving scraps by her door, Mercy Bend was ready to laugh. Until the last scrap was a child's ribbon. Blue, mud-stained, torn, stitched with the initials R.B. Eliza knew that ribbon should have been hundreds of miles away. She had signed the transfer paper herself. The day little Rose Bell was supposedly adopted beyond Red Fork. But the ribbon did not smell of Red Fork. It carried damp stone, old wax, and cold ash. The chapel scents Eliza remembered from the yard where Mercy Bend once sent its orphaned children, and then taught itself not to look back. That yard had been chained shut for 6 years. The coyote placed the ribbon on Eliza's step, lifted its narrow head toward the sealed chapel hill, and waited as if the dead had finally found a messenger hungry enough to return. Eliza Hart did not carry the ribbon to the sheriff that night. That was the first thing she would later be ashamed of. She wrapped it in flour cloth, set it inside a cracked blue cup, and sat beside it until the lamp burned low. Outside, the coyote had vanished into the mesquite below Chapel Hill. Only its tracks remained by her step, 4 narrow prints, and the drag of one wounded hind leg. Eliza told herself there were explanations. A child could have lost the ribbon years ago. A wind could have carried it. Some drunk could have thrown it over her fence as a joke. By dawn, none of those explanations held. The ribbon was not brittle enough for 6 years of sun. Its blue had faded, but the thread had not rotted. The mud pressed into the torn end was not the pale dust of Red Fork Road. It was dark, almost black, with a powdery smell of ash beneath the damp. Chapel ash. Eliza knew that smell, because she had taught letters to the mission children before Reverend Vane declared the old yard unsafe. Back then, Mercy House had been full of tin cups, bare feet, and small voices reciting from slate boards. Some children left with families who signed papers at Reverend Vane's desk while Eliza copied names in her register. Rose Bell had been 7. She spoke carefully, as if every sentence needed permission. Her older sister Ruth stood between Rose and the world like a little fence made of bones. When the transfer paper came, Reverend Vane said the sisters were being separated for their own good. Ruth was difficult. Rose was gentle enough to place with a farm family beyond Red Fork. Eliza had signed as witness, because teachers were asked to witness many things. 6 months later, she asked for the family's address so Ruth could send a Christmas card. That was when the trouble began. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the trouble returned, wearing a black coat and carrying a Bible with worn corners. Reverend Silas Vane came to Eliza's rented room behind the schoolhouse without knocking. He stopped at the threshold, tall and narrow, silver hair combed so neatly it made the poor room look guilty. His eyes moved once to the washstand. Eliza had hidden the cup in the flour bin. "Miss Hart," he said, "Sheriff Cross tells me a wild animal was seen near your door last night. He tells you quickly. He protects this town quickly. That is why we still have one." His voice was soft enough to be mistaken for kindness. Eliza had once done that. Reverend Vane glanced at the iron bed, 2 shelves of books, and the patched brown dress hanging from a nail. "You have had a hard season. No one denies it." Eliza kept her hand on the door. "I know what people say," he continued. "They say you ask old questions because new work has not come. I tell them grief sometimes leaves the mind restless. Mercy that felt smaller than accusation. I did not send for you, Reverend. No. But if that coyote returns, you must not encourage it. The trustees are already uneasy. I no longer have a classroom for them to take. You have reputation enough left to lose. The words came gently. That made them worse. Eliza understood then that he knew something had been brought to her door. Not what, perhaps, but enough. Men like Silas Vane did not walk to poor rooms because of a hungry animal, unless hunger had carried more than teeth. After he left, Eliza waited until his footsteps faded. Then she pulled the cup from the flour bin and unwrapped the ribbon again. R.B. Not Ruth. Rose. At noon, Sheriff Abel Cross posted a notice outside Gable's Mercantile. Any coyote seen inside town limits was to be shot on sight. Eliza stood across the street with the ribbon hidden inside her sleeve and felt the first clean edge of fear, not for herself, but for the wounded creature that had come close enough to ask a question no person in Mercy Bend wanted answered. That evening, she left bread beside her back step. She told herself it was only to keep the coyote from coming nearer the street. She told herself she would not follow it. At dusk, the coyote came. Eliza did not yet know its name, but the word dust rose in her mind when she saw it appear through the brown light, thin as a shadow kicked up from the road. The coyote ignored the bread. Its nose went to the ground, then to the ribbon hidden in her hand. It gave a low, broken whine. Then, it turned away from the schoolhouse and limped toward the old mission road. After 10 yards, it stopped and looked back. Eliza took one step after it. The coyote waited. Then it moved again. Not toward the chapel gate, but down the wash behind it, where rainwater used to drain under the mission wall. The old mission road had not carried a wagon in 6 years. Grass filled both ruts. Mesquite bent over the stones. The white markers that once guided donors to Mercy House stood gray now, chipped by weather and by boys with nothing better to break. Dust stayed below the road, inside the wash. He did not hurry, but he did not wander. Each few yards, his bad leg dragged a shallow line through the clay. When Eliza slowed, he stopped. When she caught up, he moved again. That was what frightened her most. A starving animal should have gone to the bread. Dust had gone to the hill. The wash curved behind the mission wall where rainwater used to run after summer storms. Eliza remembered that place from years before, when she had brought the younger children down to watch muddy water rush beneath the stones. They would squeal when the current carried leaves through the drain and out toward the creek. The drain was still there, a low stone arch, half hidden by thorn and dead grass. Eliza knelt beside it. The first thing she saw was not the opening. It was the brush. Someone had cut it freshly. The broken stems were pale inside, still damp where the knife had passed. Weather had not done that. Goats had not done that. A hand had cleared the drain, and then pulled branches back across it to make the place look forgotten. Dust pushed through. His hips struck stone. A small sound broke from his throat, but he kept going until the dark swallowed him under the wall. Eliza stayed outside, with one hand against the cold arch. Every sensible part of her told her to leave. She had already been warned. Sheriff Cross had posted a killing notice for the coyote. Reverend Vane had come to her room before breakfast. A woman caught crawling into a sealed churchyard would not be called brave in Mercy Bend. She would be called exactly what they already wanted her to be: unsteady, dangerous, unfit. Then Dust made a soft scraping sound from inside. Eliza lowered herself to the clay. The drain was narrow enough to press her shoulders. Roots caught her sleeve. Old grit filled her mouth with the taste of ash. Halfway through, her palm sank into damp mud, and when she lifted it, she saw 2 kinds of tracks in the faint light from the far side: Dust's narrow prints and a boot heel. The boot mark was too sharp to be old. Its edge had not crumbled. The mud inside it still held a dark shine from the rain 3 nights before. Someone had been using this way. Eliza crawled faster. The drain opened behind the old laundry shed. For a moment she stayed on her knees, breathing through her nose, afraid even the sound of air might betray her. The mission yard spread before her under a thin moon. Weeds had grown through the brick path. The chapel windows were boarded. The bell rope hung in the porch shadow like a dead snake. Everything looked abandoned, yet a place can lie with its face. The grass beside the laundry steps was bent in 2 narrow paths. A strip of burlap had been tucked under one loose brick to keep it from scraping. Whoever came here did not come once, and did not come by accident. Everything smelled awake, as if the locked yard had been pretending to sleep while people still moved through it after dark. Damp stone, lye soap, cold ash. Dust stood at the laundry steps with his nose pressed to the bottom board. The shed door had been nailed shut, but one plank near the threshold had warped loose. He scratched it once with his good front paw, waited, then scratched again. "Dust," Eliza whispered. Though she had not meant to give him a name aloud, the coyote did not look at her. He hooked one claw into the gap and dragged something out from under the plank. It rolled down the step and tapped against her boot. A button, bone, yellowed at the rim, small enough for a child's shirt. On the back, someone had scratched a number with a knife. Eliza closed her fingers around it. Mercy House had numbered everything: beds, trunks, tin cups, blanket hooks. Reverend Vane used to say, "Order was the first kindness given to the forgotten." Rosebell had slept in cot 17. A hinge groaned near the side gate. Dust froze. Eliza dropped behind the laundry steps as a lantern beam slid across the weeds. Two men entered through the small gate used for deliveries. One was Caleb Rusk, the church handyman, broad through the shoulders, his beard cut square beneath his chin. The other was younger, with a red scarf at his neck and a shotgun held too proudly. "Preacher wants it hidden before Sunday," Caleb said. The younger man lifted the lantern. "Hidden how?" "Brush first. Stone later, if folks start asking. Sheriff says that Coyote's been near the schoolwoman. Then shoot it, before it brings company." Eliza felt Dust gather himself in the dark beside her. She reached one hand toward him, not touching, only begging him to stay still. The lantern moved closer. Caleb stopped near the drain and looked down. "Tracks." The younger man raised the shotgun. Dust sprang from the weeds. He did not leap at them. He ran away from Eliza, across the open yard, limping hard enough that pain seemed to pull him sideways. The lantern jerked. The shotgun fired. The blast slammed against the chapel boards and rolled over the wall. Dust vanished behind the old well curb. "Missed!" the younger man snapped. Caleb cursed under his breath. Find where it went. A wounded coyote crawls home. Eliza understood what that meant. If Dust bled, they would follow him. If they followed him, they would reach her door. The two men moved toward the chapel, arguing in low voices. Eliza waited until the lantern turned away, then crawled back into the drain with the button clenched in her fist. This time the passage felt smaller. Her torn sleeve caught on a root. Her ribs pressed stone. Dirt slid into her collar. Behind her, Caleb's voice rose. "Check under the wall." Eliza pulled harder. The root snapped. She spilled into the wash and rolled against the bank, holding her breath until the lantern glow faded from the arch behind her. She did not climb to the road. She followed the creek bed south, bent low, until the mission wall disappeared behind brush. Only then did she open her hand. The button lay in her palm, a ribbon from a girl, supposedly sent beyond Red Fork. A button from her old cot. A fresh boot print beneath a sealed wall. Men sent to hide the drain before Sunday. Eliza had not found the truth. She had found the place where the lie still breathed. A sound came from farther down the wash. Dust stood in the moonlit clay, ribs moving fast. No blood showed, but he held his body crooked, as if the shot had torn the air too close to him. Something dark was clamped in his mouth. Eliza stepped toward him slowly. He dropped it and backed away. It was a broken piece of school slate, small enough to fit a child's hand. Faint chalk lines still ghosted one side. On the other, scratched deep enough to scar the stone, were two words: "Not gone." Eliza kept the slate hidden under her mattress until morning, those two words still pressing against her mind. Not gone. The words had been scratched so deep that chalk dust still sat inside the cuts. She touched them once before dawn, then pulled her hand back as if the stone had spoken aloud. Ribbon, button, slate, three small things, and not one of them strong enough to stand in court. But together, they pointed. At sunrise, Dust was not at her step. He lay beneath the schoolhouse porch, half inside the shadow, watching her with dull yellow eyes. The biscuit she had left the night before sat beside him, broken but mostly uneaten. "You should be far from town," Eliza whispered. Dust only lowered his head. She did not reach for him. A wild creature survived by keeping distance, and after the shot in the mission yard, she had no right to ask him for trust. She left water in a shallow tin and went inside through the warped back window. The schoolhouse no longer belonged to her, but its old cabinet still did. Behind a stack of cracked slates, Eliza found the mission attendance registers. Reverend Vane had never cared for school records once the trustees removed her. They were only teachers' books. Names, dates, spelling marks, weather notes. Small things, the kind powerful men forgot to burn. She opened the June register from 6 years before. Rosebell's name appeared on the first Monday, again on Wednesday, and then, beside Friday, a thin line crossed through it, transferred. Eliza stared at the date beside the mark. June 12. Her mouth went dry. She remembered the adoption paper Reverend Vane had brought her to witness. She remembered the day because the heat had made the ink thick on the nib. June 9. Dry. Windless. Ruth Bell crying outside the door while Rose stood silent with a blue ribbon tied around one braid. June 12 had not been dry. June 12 was the flood day. Eliza turned the pages too fast and nearly tore one. In the back pocket of the register, where she kept notices from parents in the mission, she found Reverend Vane's old note. Road washed out. Children remain at Mercy House. S.V. The handwriting was his. The date was June 12. If Rose remained at Mercy House that day, she had not been adopted beyond Red Fork that morning. One paper was lying. Maybe more than one. A wagon stopped outside. Eliza closed the register and looked through the dusty glass. Edwin Sallow, the county clerk, crossed the street toward his office with a bundle of files under one arm. He wore brown gloves, though the day was warm, and he kept his chin tucked as if every window judged him. Eliza slid the register and Vane's note into her satchel. Dust watched from beneath the porch as she came down the steps. His nose lifted when she whispered Rose's name. For one breath, he seemed ready to rise. Then, his wounded leg trembled, and he sank back into the shade. The clerk's office sat behind the courthouse, where law smelled of ink, dust, and locked drawers. Edwin looked up when Eliza entered. The pen in his hand jumped, leaving a black tear on the page. "Miss Hart," he said. "School matters go through the trustees. This is not a school matter. I need the adoption file for Rose Bell. Mercy House. June. 6 years ago." His eyes moved to her satchel. "Those records are sealed. By county order?" He looked away. "By church order?" she asked. Edwin stood too quickly. "You should go home. I signed as witness." "You signed what was placed before you." That is not an answer. For a moment, fear showed plainly on his face. Then he opened the top drawer and pulled out a folder so quickly, Eliza felt the room change. No sealed record waited in a top drawer by accident. He set it on the counter. "Here. Read it and leave this alone." The file looked proper. County seal, Reverend Vane's signature. Transfer family, Nathaniel and Cora Briggs, Red Fork Road. Date, June 12. Witness, Eliza Hart. Her name at the bottom made her stomach turn. It was almost her hand. Almost. The E leaned too sharply. The H stood narrow. The cross on the T ran straight through, without the little hesitation she always made. Whoever copied her had studied her letters, but not the way her hand slowed when she was uncertain. "This is forged," she said. Edwin's face drained. The door opened behind her. Reverend Silas Vane stepped in, calm as Sunday morning. Sheriff Cross stood just beyond his shoulder. "Miss Hart," Vane said, "how unfortunate to find you troubling county business again." Eliza kept one hand on the folder. "Why does Rose Bell's transfer say June 12? A date copied from memory can trouble a tired mind." "I have your note from that day." The road was washed out. Sheriff Cross's gaze sharpened. Vane's smile did not move. "Then bring your concern to the trustees properly. Do not harass Mr. Sallow, or remove sealed records from this office." There it was, the trap. If she took the folder, they would call her thief. If she left it, the forged signature stayed safely behind Edwin's counter. Eliza did not take it. Instead, she folded the corner of the top page, just enough to crease the line under her false name. As Edwin reached to pull the file back, his spilled ink touched her glove. She let it stain the cloth, marking the place where the signature had rested. Small things. She was learning their value. Outside, she walked past the sheriff without speaking. Only when she reached the alley behind the print shop did her knees weaken. Jonah Pike was setting type for the morning notices. Ink darkened his thumb. He looked too young to be afraid. But fear came into his face the moment she placed Vane's flood note beside the school register. June 12, Eliza said. The file says Rose was adopted that morning. Jonah read the note twice. But the road was washed out, he said. Yes. And your signature? Forged. He swallowed. Miss Hart, if we print this without the county file, Vane will ruin us both. Jonah had once printed a county notice about Miriam Vale, the attorney who reopened a forged land claim 2 counties west. He remembered the ending better than the headline. She could not move until a witness signed a statement. A second copy survived outside the local office, and the first accusation was spoken where neighbors could hear it. He had seen respectable men survive ink by keeping every copy inside the room where they owned the key. Paper alone dies in a drawer, he said. It needs a living voice and another paper somewhere safe. Eliza looked at the register, the flood note, and the ink on her glove. She had a fixed date. She had a stain. She had the memory of a signature that was not hers. She did not yet have a witness brave enough to sign, and Vane controlled the only office where the first paper slept. I am not asking you to print it yet. Then what are you asking? Eliza opened her stained glove and showed him the ink line. I need you to remember exactly where a lie sat on a page. Before Jonah could answer, something scratched at the back door. Once, then twice more, weak but deliberate. Eliza opened it. Dust stood in the alley, with mud on his muzzle and a strip of red sealing wax stuck beneath his jaw. Not church wax. County wax. Jonah looked from the Coyote to Eliza. The county seal, he whispered. Dust dropped a chewed scrap of paper at her feet. Only 3 words remained readable. Bell, transfer, paid. Jonah Pike read the chewed scrap twice before he dared touch it. It lay on his print table under the pale noon light, muddy at the edges, red county wax clinging to one torn corner. Most of the writing had been destroyed by dust's teeth and the wet alley, but 3 words remained clear enough to chill the room. Bell, transfer, paid. Jonah looked toward the back door where the Coyote had disappeared into shadow. That animal came from the county office? Or from someone using its seal? Eliza said. Jonah folded his ink-stained hands together, a habit he had when trying not to shake. Then you need Ruth Bell. If Rose's name is on that scrap, Ruth may be the only living person who knows what it means. Eliza had looked for Ruth once before. 3 years after Mercy House closed, the girl had come back to Mercy Bend with cropped hair, a scar over one eyebrow, and a way of watching doors that made every room look like a trap. Town women called her ungrateful. Storekeepers called her a thief. Reverend Vane called her a sorrowful example of what happened when a child refused discipline. Eliza had found her behind the livery and spoken Rose's name. Ruth had thrown a rock hard enough to split Eliza's lip. By noon, Jonah led Eliza through the backlots behind the livery, past broken wheels, rain barrels, and a wall blackened by stove smoke. Dust followed from the far side of the alley, keeping to the shade beneath wagons. His limp was worse after the shot in the mission yard. He stopped often, not from uncertainty, but from pain. Each time, Ruth's old ribbon pressed against Eliza's ribs, as if reminding her why turning back was no longer a mercy. Behind the blacksmith's shed stood a storage lean-to with rusted tin for a roof. Jonah tapped twice on the sideboard. No answer came. He tapped again. Softer. A girl's voice spoke from inside. I have a knife. I believe you, Jonah said. Miss Hart is with me. Silence held long enough for Eliza to hear Dust breathing near the wagon wheel behind them. Then the door opened a hand's width. Ruth Bell was 14 now. though hunger had kept her small. Her hair had been cut unevenly with dull shears, and the white scar above her eyebrow pulled one eye slightly narrow. She looked at Jonah first, then at Eliza, then past both of them to the coyote. Her face changed. Where did he get hurt? Eliza had expected anger. The question struck her harder than that would have. At the mission yard, Ruth's fingers tightened on the door. He went back? He brought me something from there. Eliza unfolded the blue ribbon. Ruth's face lost its hardness so quickly that for one breath, Eliza saw the child she had once taught. Ruth reached out, stopped before touching it, and closed her hand around air. That was mine, Ruth said. Eliza felt the floor tilt beneath the moment. Yours? Mine first. Rose wore it that day. Hers tore on the cot nail, and Reverend Vane said new families did not like dirty-looking children, so I gave her mine. Ruth stared at the initials stitched along the edge. Mama made it before fever took her. R.B. Ruth Bell. Rose used to say it meant Rose, beautiful. Jonah lowered his eyes. Eliza knelt so her voice would not come down from above. Ruth, the county file says Rose was adopted beyond Red Fork on June 12. No. You remember the date? I remember water. Ruth rubbed her thumb against the scar over her brow. Rain came hard. The wash filled. We were kept inside because nobody could cross the road. Rose was in cot 17 with a cough. I heard her crying after dark. Eliza took the bone button from her sleeve and showed the scratched number. Ruth flinched. That came from under her cot. Dust found it. He used to come to the drain, Ruth whispered. We fed him crusts when the cook wasn't watching. Rose said he was not wicked, just hungry. As if called by memory, Dust came nearer. He did not enter the lean-to. He stood outside the door, ribs lifting fast, ears low, eyes fixed on Ruth. She reached under a crate and placed a stale heel of bread on the dirt. Dust waited until her hand withdrew before taking it. He chewed once, carefully, then lay down with the bread between his paws as if even eating required permission. Eliza pulled the broken slate from her satchel. Did Rose write this? Ruth read the scratched words. Not gone, and her mouth tightened. Rose pressed too hard when she wrote. She broke 2 slates that spring. So it is hers? I don't know. The answer came sharp, then broke softer. I don't know because knowing things never kept anybody safe. Horses stopped in the alley. Jonah moved to the crack between boards. Sheriff, Ruth backed toward the rear wall. You led him here. No, Eliza said. You always lead them somewhere. Teachers, preachers, sheriffs. They write things down, and children vanish. Eliza had no clean answer, because some part of it was true. She had signed one paper and spent 6 years believing paper could not bleed. Sheriff Cross called from outside. Ruth Bell, come out where I can see you. Caleb Rusk stood beside him, broad hat low over his brow. The younger man with the red scarf held a shotgun across his arm. Not aimed, but ready to become aimed. Caleb's eyes moved at once to Eliza's satchel. I came to speak with Ruth, Eliza said from the doorway. About stolen county property? Cross asked. That told her they did not know what Dust had taken, only that something was missing. Cross unfolded a notice. Ruth Bell is wanted for theft from the church storehouse. Ruth laughed once behind Eliza, dry and bitter. Biscuits. 6 years late, but he found the charge. The red scarf man stepped forward. Dust rose so suddenly the horses jerked against their reins. He did not lunge. He planted himself between Ruth and the men, shaking on his bad leg, showing teeth that were more warning than strength. Caleb touched the shotgun barrel. Move the animal. Eliza lifted one hand. Sheriff, if you arrest Ruth, do it on the main street, with the charge read aloud and Mr. Pike there to print every word. Cross's face hardened. Do not instruct me. Then do not hide behind a shed to take a hungry girl. Jonah stepped beside Eliza, pale but steady. I will print the charge exactly as given. For a moment, the alley belonged to silence. Cross looked at Ruth, then at Dust, then at the shotgun. Shame did not defeat him, but it slowed him. Tomorrow morning, he said. My office. Ruth answers questions, or I bring her in. He pointed at Dust. And if that coyote shows teeth again, I will not miss. When the men left, Ruth sank against the wall as if her bones had gone hollow. Dust remained by the door until the hoofbeats faded, then lowered himself with a soft, pained breath. Ruth reached into her boot and drew out a folded strip of paper, softened by sweat and years of hiding. Rose gave me this before they took her from the cot. I thought it was a child's hiding game. Eliza unfolded it carefully. There were no words, only 7 numbers written in a hard, uneven hand. 17, 4, 9, 12, 6, 3, 1. Jonah stared. A code? Ruth looked toward the Mission Hill. Rose said, if I ever got out, I should give it to the man who asked too many questions. Eliza felt the room narrow around her. What man? Ruth's eyes found hers, and the answer came with 6 years of dust on it. Thomas Wren. Thomas Wren had been dead in Eliza's mind for 4 years, though no grave in Mercy Bend held his name. That was the cruelest kind of death. The kind a person had to finish alone. He had left town after the trouble at Mercy House began, or that was what people said. Reverend Vane told her Thomas had taken survey work along the southern road and fallen ill before reaching Fort Cale. A fever, he said. No family to send for. No body worth hauling through summer heat. Only a coat returned in a flour sack, with a note written by a man Eliza had never met. For years, she had hated Thomas for leaving without goodbye, then hated herself for hating a dead man. Now Ruth Bell's words sat between them like a match struck in a closed room. The man who asked too many questions. Jonah took the folded strip from Eliza's hand and studied the numbers. 17, we know. Cot 17. Ruth sat on an overturned crate, arms tight around herself. Rose said them over and over that night. I thought she was scared. 4, 9, 12, 6, 3, 1, Jonah murmured. Could be dates. Eliza shook her head. Or places. Dust lay near the lean-to door with his muzzle on his paws. He had eaten the bread Ruth gave him, but slowly, as if every swallow had to be weighed against pain. When Jonah said Thomas's name again, the coyote's ears lifted. Ruth noticed first. He knew him. Eliza turned. Dust? We did not call him that. Rose called him Saint because he came when nobody else did. Ruth's mouth tightened. Thomas fed him too. Not much. He was poor like us, only taller. Eliza closed her eyes for one breath. Thomas had often carried stale biscuits in his coat pocket. She had thought it was for his own supper when survey work ran late. What did Thomas do at Mercy House? She asked. Ruth looked toward the alley before answering. He measured things. He was a surveyor. He measured the yard, the chapel wall, the wash, the old storage rooms. Reverend Vane said the county needed repair drawings after the fire. But Thomas talked to children when no one watched. What did he ask? Names, real names. Who came with brothers? Who left without trunks? Who still got letters after being adopted? Jonah's face changed. Letters? Ruth nodded. Some children had kin. Not good kin always, but kin. Letters came. Reverend read them first. Sometimes children never saw them. Eliza felt the first shape of the daiso. Thomas must have hidden something where Rose could remember, or where Ruth could find it, Jonah said. They could not go to Thomas's old room in daylight. Too many eyes watched the street now, so they waited in the print shop until evening came, with Ruth hidden behind stacks of old notices and Dust asleep under the back press. Once, Caleb Rusk passed the window and looked in. Jonah kept setting type, though the same letter slipped from his hand 3 times. At dusk, they crossed behind the feed store to the room Thomas had rented above the abandoned harness shop. The stairs complained under Jonah's weight. Eliza had not climbed them since the day she received the flour sack with Thomas's coat. The room was smaller than memory. A narrow bed, a broken chair, a shelf still holding survey nails in a tobacco tin. Dust came in last, nose low to the boards. He moved at once to the corner near the window and scratched once. Eliza's throat tightened. That was where he kept his field chest. The chest was gone. Sold after his death, Reverend Vane had told her, to pay lodging debt. but the floor beneath the window still held a square of darker wood where it had stood. Jonah knelt and ran his knife along the boards. "These nails are newer." Eliza looked at Ruth's strip again. 17, 4, 9, 12, 6, 3, 1. "Measurements?" Jonah asked. Thomas had loved exactness. "Not because paper made truth," he once said, but because liars disliked straight lines. Eliza counted the floorboards from the wall. 17 brought her to the dark square, 4 boards inward, 9 inches from the seam, 12 from the window leg. Jonah worked the knife under the plank. The board lifted with a dry crack. Inside was not a ledger, not money, not the kind of proof that could end a room with one shout. Only a flat packet wrapped in oilcloth, tied with thread gone brown. Eliza knew the knot before she touched it. Thomas tied knots the way he wrote letters, neat but never pretty. Her hands shook as she opened it. The first page was a map of Mercy House drawn in Thomas's hand. Not the public yard. Beneath the chapel floor, he had marked a crawl space. Beneath the laundry, a storage room. Beside the wash drain, a narrow passage labeled Lower Run. In the margin were children's initials, cot numbers, and dates that did not match the adoption files. R. B. Cot 17, not transferred. E. M. Cot 4 name, reused. J. C. Cot. 9 letters withheld. Jonah whispered, "God help us." Ruth leaned over the paper, searching not like a witness, but like a sister, afraid to find exactly what she came for. Rose wrote the numbers from this. Eliza turned the next page. A letter lay there. "Miss Hart," it began. She had to sit on the bed before she could read further. "If this reaches you, I failed to bring it myself. Do not trust a clean seal from Mr. Sallow. Do not trust any transfer signed after the flood. Rose Bell is still inside Mercy House as of June 12, and at least 6 names have been used twice. I thought at first it was money. It is worse. They are moving children on paper first, then deciding what to do with the bodies that still answer to those names." The words blurred. Thomas had written to her. He had tried to come back. Eliza read on. "I kept your name out of my questions, because Vane watches you already. If he says I ran, do not believe the whole of it. If he says I stole, ask what I stole and from whom. If he says I died owing him grace, know that I owed you truth." Beneath the letter was a smaller sheet, signed in a harsher hand. "I, Thomas Wren, admit to removing county adoption copies and misplacing mission funds under my care." Eliza knew at once what it was. A confession. False or forced. The kind of paper that turned a man into a warning. Jonah took it gently. "This is why Vane blamed him." "No," Eliza said, though her voice hardly sounded like hers. "This is why Thomas disappeared." Dust gave a low whine. The sound broke something in Ruth. "He came that night," she said. "Thomas. After Rose was taken from the cot, he told me to remember the numbers. He said Miss Hart would know what straight lines meant. Then Reverend Vane came with Caleb. Thomas told me to hide under the laundry shelf." "What happened to him?" Eliza asked. Ruth's face closed in pain. "I heard a hit, then praying. Reverend Vane prayed when he was angry. No one spoke. Outside, wagon wheels rolled over the street below. Ordinary life passing beneath a room that had just changed the dead." Eliza looked again at Thomas's letter. For 4 years, she had carried shame like a stone. Shame that he left. Shame that she doubted him. Shame that she signed a paper he may have died trying to undo. Now the shame did not leave her. It changed shape. It became something sharper. A duty. Jonah folded the map carefully. "We need this copied. We need it safe," Eliza said. Ruth looked toward Dust. "He knows the Lower Run." The Coyote had risen despite his hurt leg. He stood by the door now, nose lifted, body tense. Then Eliza heard it too. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, slow and measured. Jonah blew out the lamp. In the dark, a voice came from below, gentle as a sermon. "Miss Hart," Reverend Vane called. "Some rooms should not be opened by grief alone." Jonah blew out the lamp, but darkness did not make the room safer. It only gave every sound a sharper edge. Ruth's breath caught beside the bed. Eliza heard Jonah fold Thomas's map once, then stop, afraid even paper might speak too loudly. Dust stood near the door with his head low and his ears forward, not growling now, only listening. Reverend Vane climbed the stairs as if he had all night. "Miss Hart," he called, "I know grief can make old rooms feel holy, but Mr. Wren's belongings were settled years ago." Eliza slipped Thomas's letter inside her bodice. Jonah folded the map against his shirt. Ruth took the false confession before Eliza could stop her and tucked it into the lining of her boot. The door opened without a knock. Vane stood in the hallway holding a lantern. Caleb Rusk waited behind him with one hand on the rail. Sheriff Cross was not there. That made it worse. This was not yet law. This was the hour before law arrived, when powerful men decided what law would later say. Vane's lantern swept the room. It paused on the lifted floorboard. His face did not change. "How sad," he said. Thomas had a habit of hiding things from those who wished him well. "You knew the board was loose," Eliza said. "I knew Thomas was troubled. He wrote to me. Many troubled men write letters. Most of them mistake guilt for courage." Dust moved one step forward. Caleb raised a club from beside his leg. "Call it off. He is not mine to call." "No," Vane said softly. "That is the danger with wild things. They attach themselves to wounded people and convince them instinct is truth." Eliza understood what he was doing. He was not asking for the packet because asking would admit it existed. He was building a story around her before morning could contradict him. Ruth stepped from the shadow. "Rose was still in cot 17 after your paper said she left." For the first time, Vane looked at her directly. His kindness turned colder. "Ruth Bell, you have grown into every warning we tried to save you from." Jonah moved toward the window. The alley below was narrow, with a shed roof close enough to reach. He lifted the sash an inch. It squealed. Caleb heard it and came forward. Dust sprang, not at Caleb's throat. At the lantern. The coyote struck Vane's wrist with his shoulder, wild and clumsy from pain. The lantern fell, hit the floor, and shattered. Flame crawled across spilled oil. Caleb cursed. Vane stumbled back. In the confusion, Jonah shoved the map into Eliza's hands and pushed her toward the window. "Go." Ruth climbed first. Eliza followed, then Jonah. Dust limped after them, but his bad leg failed on the frame. Eliza grabbed the loose skin at his shoulder and hauled him through, while smoke thickened behind them. They crossed the shed roof, dropped behind the harness shop, and ran bent double through laundry lines and stacked crates. Dust could not run far. After 2 alleys, he stumbled against a rain barrel and slid to the dirt. Ruth knelt at once. "He is done." "He is breathing," Eliza said. "That is not the same." Jonah looked back toward the street. Vane will have Sheriff Cross by now. They hid Dust under a canvas behind the Cooper's yard and carried the papers to the print shop. Jonah barred the door and lit one small lamp. "We copy everything," he said. "Not print. Copy. If they seize one set, another lives." They worked for an hour. Eliza copied Thomas's letter. Jonah traced the map by hand, marking the lower run, the chapel crawl space, and the child initials in the margins. Ruth sat by the back door, listening for boots. Dust lay beneath the press, body curled tight, one hind leg twitching in sleep. Before dawn, Sheriff Cross came with Caleb and the red scarf man. Cross held a paper bearing Vane's seal and county wax. "Open," he called. "By complaint of Reverend Silas Vane, this shop is suspected of holding stolen church property." Jonah looked at Eliza. They moved fast. "No," she said. They were ready. He opened the front door, because refusing would make a different trap. Sheriff Cross entered with the weariness of a man who had already chosen the easier sin. His eyes went to the press, the type cases, the locked drawer under Jonah's desk. "I need whatever Miss Hart brought you from Thomas Wren's room." "Thomas Wren's room has been empty for years," Jonah said. Cross looked at Eliza. "Do not make me search you. You would need a charge. Disturbing sealed records, trespass, theft, harboring a dangerous animal." His gaze moved to the floor, where Dust's tail showed beneath the press. "That one I can act on now." Ruth stepped in front of the press. "Shoot him, And you prove you are afraid of a coyote. Caleb lifted his club. Eliza raised her copied pages. Sheriff, if these are stolen, read the first line and tell me who they belong to. Cross hesitated. Vane entered behind him, calm, clean, and without ash on his coat. They belong to a dead man's confusion. Then let the town hear them, Eliza said. Not every pain deserves an audience. No. But every forged child does. The words landed hard enough to silence even Caleb. Cross took the pages from Eliza. His eyes moved over Thomas's first sentence, then down to the list of initials. Something uncertain passed through his face. Vane saw it. Sheriff, he said, you are not trained to judge damaged documents. Maybe not, Cross answered. It was the first crack. Then Caleb reached past Ruth and dragged dust from beneath the press by the scruff. The coyote yelped once, thin and raw. Eliza lunged, but the red scarf man caught her arm. Vane's voice stayed gentle. Let the animal go, Miss Hart. Mercy sometimes means ending suffering. Dust twisted in Caleb's grip, snapping at air. His jaws closed on a strip of Caleb's coat and tore the pocket open. Something fell to the floor and rolled beneath the press. A key, not large, iron, tied with black thread. Ruth went white. That is the lower run key. The laundry lock. Caleb kicked for it, but Jonah snatched it up and backed toward the press. Cross stared at Caleb. Why do you carry a mission key after 6 years? Caleb's mouth opened, closed, then found the answer Vane had trained into him. For repairs. What repairs? Eliza asked. No one answered. Outside the shop, a small crowd had gathered at the windows. Morning workers, 2 women from the mercantile, the blacksmith, a boy with flour on his sleeves. Public eyes changed the weight of the room. Vane stepped closer to Cross and lowered his voice, but not enough. This is precisely how panic spreads. No, Eliza said. This is how secrecy weakens. Sheriff Cross returned Thomas's copied pages to her, though his face looked pained by the act. I am not saying I believe you. I did not ask you to. I am saying no one shoots the coyote in this room. Caleb dropped dust. The animal hit the floor hard and crawled under the press again. Vane looked at the crowd through the window, then at Eliza. The mask did not fall, it only tightened. Tomorrow after service, he said, I will open Mercy House records before the trustees and the sheriff. Bring your accusations there if you wish to make them public. Bring the girl, too, if she is not afraid to repeat tavern stories in a room of honest people. Ruth's hands shook. Eliza knew a trap when it was dressed as an invitation. Vane would choose the room, the records, the witnesses, and the order of speech. He would put Ruth on display and make her poverty answer for his paper, but refusing would make them look like shadows. After Vane left, Jonah locked the door and leaned against it. He will bury us tomorrow. Eliza looked at dust under the press. He had one eye open, fixed not on her, but on the iron key in Jonah's hand. No, she said, tonight we use the key. They waited until Mercy Bend went quiet. Quiet did not mean safe. It only meant the town had shut its doors and left the dark to whoever still had business with it. In the print shop, Jonah made 3 copies of Thomas Wren's map by the weakest lamp he owned. One stayed beneath the press, one went into Eliza's dress lining, and the third he sealed for County Attorney Miriam Vale. If none of us come back, Jonah said, sealing it with plain wax. My delivery boy rides at dawn. Eliza looked at the envelope and understood what he was really saying. They were no longer gathering proof for themselves. They were preparing for proof to outlive them. Dust slept through most of the copying. When Ruth touched his flank, he opened one eye but did not rise. The torn skin near his shoulder was not bleeding, yet his breathing stayed shallow. Ruth had washed mud from his leg with water from the rain barrel, and the old trap scar looked angrier now, raised and dark in the lamplight. He cannot go, Eliza said. Dust lifted his head at the sound of her voice. Ruth shook hers. He will go whether we ask or not. That was the trouble with loyalty. It did not always wait for permission. They left through the back door after midnight. Jonah carried a small lantern wrapped in cloth. Ruth carried the iron key. Eliza carried Thomas's map and a short-handled spade from the cooper's yard. Dust followed behind them, slower than before, setting his bad leg down carefully, as if testing whether the earth still meant to charge him for every step. They kept to the creek bed instead, where cottonwood roots broke the bank and dry grass hid their tracks. Twice they dropped flat, as riders passed above them. Vane had expected fools at the front gate. Thomas's map led them elsewhere. The lower run began beyond the laundry wall, under a patch of wild sage, where the ground dipped in a way only a surveyor would have noticed. Dust found it before Eliza did. He pressed his nose to the dirt, scraped once, then sat back with a thin whine. Ruth cleared the sage with both hands. Beneath it lay a narrow wooden hatch, sunk flush with the earth and blackened by years of weather. The key fit. And that frightened Eliza more than if it had not. The hatch opened with a sigh of old damp. Jonah lowered the wrapped lantern. Stone steps descended into a passage barely high enough to walk bent over. The air smelled of lye, ash, and something metallic beneath the earth. Dust went first, though every movement cost him. Ruth cursed softly and followed close enough to catch him if he fell. The lower run had once carried wash water from the laundry to the creek. After the chapel fire, someone had widened part of it and braced the walls with stolen fence boards. Thomas had drawn that change in red pencil. At the first bend, Eliza saw why. A man could move through here unseen from the gate, unseen from the road, and come up beneath the chapel floor. Jonah touched the wall. This was no repair. No, Eliza said. It was a second Mercy house, one the town never visited. They found the first shelf under the laundry. Tin cups, 2 cracked slates, a bundle of children's shoes tied together by size, not by owner. Ruth turned away from the shoes, her face white. Eliza wanted to stop there, to let grief have room, but Dust kept moving. His claws clicked weakly on stone. At the end of the passage, he nosed a loose board beneath a chapel support beam and scratched. The board would not lift. Eliza used the spade. Jonah used his knife. Ruth held the lantern so close, the light shook across all their hands. Above them, faint through the floorboards, came the murmur of men talking near the front gate. The sound passed, faded, then returned. Time had become a thing with teeth. The board came free. Behind it sat a square tin box wrapped in oilcloth and tied with black thread. Eliza knew before opening it that Thomas had not placed it there. The knot was different, smaller, clumsier. A child's knot pulled tight with frightened fingers. Inside were papers, a small cloth purse, and 7 wooden tags marked with numbers. 17 was on top. Beneath it lay a folded page with Rosebell's name written in careful, uneven letters. Ruth made no sound. That was worse than crying. Eliza opened the page. Miss Hart, it read. If Ruth finds you, tell her I did not go pretty like Reverend said. Tell her I kept her ribbon because it made me braver. Mr. Thomas said names are stronger than numbers if somebody remembers them. My name is Rosebell. I am 7. I was not gone on June 12. Eliza could not read the rest aloud. Jonah took off his hat. Ruth stood very still, then reached into the tin and lifted the wooden tag marked 17. She held it against her chest, as if it were the only piece of Rose the world had left solid. Beneath Rose's letter were copies of transfer slips, donation receipts, and a list written in Thomas's hand. 7 children, 7 cot numbers, 7 official placements. Beside each name was a second notation, payments received after transfer. In another column were land claim references, small inheritances left by dead parents or distant kin. Not wealth enough to make a banker famous, enough to make forgotten children profitable. Jonah whispered, "This is the chain." "No," Eliza said, looking at the last page. It bore Reverend Vane's handwriting. Funds held in trust until placement confirmed. Names may be reused where no kin comes forward. It was not a confession spoken in panic. It was worse. It was policy written by a man who believed no one powerless would ever read it back to him. A scrape sounded behind them, and Dust turned first. Lantern light appeared at the far bend. Caleb Rusk's voice came low through the passage. "I told you the key was gone." The red scarf man answered, "Then they are down here." Ruth shoved the tin box into Eliza's arms. Go. There is no other way. Dust limped past them toward the bend. No, Eliza whispered, but the coyote did not look back. He moved into the narrowest part of the passage, where fallen boards leaned against the wall. He bit one rope end and pulled with all the strength left in him. The brace shifted. The first board dropped across the run with a crack. Caleb's lantern stopped. Animals here, the red scarf man said. A gun cocked. Ruth ran forward, but Jonah caught her. Dust pulled again. Another board fell, then a third, not enough to bury the passage, but enough to block a man for precious minutes. The shot came anyway. It struck stone and filled the lower run with white dust. Eliza could no longer see dust. She heard him scramble back through the powder, coughing, dragging his bad leg harder than before. When he reached Ruth, he fell against her knees. This time, he did not rise. They carried him between them through the hatch and into the cold before dawn. Behind them, Caleb cursed from the blocked passage, but the delay had given them distance. Jonah took the envelope for Miriam Vale, added copies from the tin, and sent his delivery boy west before the first church bell. By sunrise, Mercy Bend had begun moving toward the chapel hall for Reverend Vane's public hearing. Eliza washed the dirt from Rosebell's letter with hands that would not stop trembling. Ruth sat beside Dust under the print shop table, one hand on his ribs, counting each breath like a prayer she did not trust. Jonah looked at the tin box, then at the street, filling with townspeople. They will call it stolen. Yes, Eliza said. They will call Ruth a liar. Yes, they will say, Thomas forged it to save himself. Eliza closed the box and stood. Then we make them say it in front of Rose. The chapel hall filled faster than Mercy Bend wanted to admit. By the time the last church bell faded, men stood along the walls with hats in their hands. Women crowded the back benches, and children peered through the open windows until their mothers pulled them away. Reverend Vane had arranged the room carefully. The trustees sat at the front table. Sheriff Cross stood near the door. Edwin Sallow had brought 3 clean folders, tied with white string. Caleb Rusk kept close to the side aisle, his coat pocket torn where dust had taken the lower run key. Vane opened with prayer. He prayed for order, for mercy, for protection against rumor. He never once prayed for the children whose names lay inside Eliza's tin box. When he finished, he turned to the room with his soft face in place. Miss Hart has asked to bring Old Payne before this congregation. I have allowed it, though I fear she has been misled by a runaway girl, a dead man's guilt, and a wild animal. Ruth sat beside Eliza with Rose's wooden tag hidden in her fist. Jonah stood behind them with copied papers inside his coat. Dust lay under the bench, half in shadow, breathing shallowly but awake. Eliza rose. Before she could speak, Edwin Sallow placed a folder on the table. Official transfer record for Rose Bell. June 12, signed and sealed. Vane nodded sadly. We begin with truth already preserved. No, Eliza said. We begin with a date. She laid Reverend Vane's own flood note beside the folder. The paper was old, yellowed at the fold, but the writing was clear. Road washed out. Children remain at Mercy House. S.V. A murmur passed through the hall. Vane smiled as if forgiving a child. Road conditions change. Not before noon on a flood day, Eliza said. School was dismissed. Wagons stopped. Sheriff Cross pulled a mule team from the wash that afternoon. All eyes turned to the sheriff. Cross did not answer at first. Then he said, the wash was high. It was not help. Not yet. But it was not denial. Vane's first mask tightened. Even if a clerical date was copied poorly, it proves no crime. Then explain my signature. Eliza showed the copied transfer and the school register where her true hand appeared page after page. Jonah passed both to the trustees. The forged signature looked close enough to fool a stranger, but not enough to survive comparison. The E leaned wrong. The T crossed without pause. Edwin's lips went gray. Vane touched his sleeve. Mr. Sallow, grief makes patterns where none exist. Edwin swallowed and said nothing. The second resistance came from Caleb. Those papers were stolen from church property. Eliza opened the tin box. This was hidden under the chapel floor. behind boards in the lower run. The key came from your pocket. Caleb looked at Sheriff Cross. For repairs. What repairs? Cross asked. No answer came. Eliza lifted the wooden tag, marked 17. Rose Bell slept in cot 17. Her sister gave her a ribbon. Dust brought that ribbon back from the sealed yard. Under the laundry board, he found a button scratched with the same number. In the lower run, we found Rose's letter. Vane raised a hand. No child's letter should be used to wound the living. Ruth stood so suddenly the bench scraped. She was living when she wrote it. The room went quiet. Eliza read Rose's words. Not all of them, only enough. My name is Rose Bell. I am 7. I was not gone on June 12. A woman in the second row began to cry. Not loudly. That made it worse. Vane moved to his third defense. Ruth Bell has stolen from this church. She has lied for food and slept in alleys. Are we now to place Mercy House under judgment because a bitter girl remembers storms and ribbons? Ruth's face went white, but she did not sit. I stole biscuits, she said. You stole names. The words struck harder than shouting. Jonah stepped forward and laid Thomas Wren's map on the table. Thomas marked 7 children. Cot numbers. Dates. Payments received after transfer. Vane's voice cooled. Thomas Wren admitted to removing county copies and misplacing mission funds. There is the confession, Eliza said. She gave the forced confession to Sheriff Cross. Then she gave him Thomas's letter. Cross read both. The room waited through every line that changed his face. When he reached the sentence about clean seals from Mr. Sallow, he looked at Edwin. When he reached Rose, Bell is still inside Mercy House as of June 12, he looked at Vane. Vane did not flinch. A guilty man blaming others. Then why hide his map under the floor? Eliza asked. Why keep children's shoes in the lower run? Why reuse names where no kin came forward? She laid the final page on the table. Funds held in trust until placement confirmed. Names may be reused where no kin comes forward. This time the handwriting was Vane's. Edwin Sallow made a sound like a man being pulled from deep water. He told me it was accounting. Vane turned slowly. Careful, but fear had kept Edwin silent for years, and public eyes changed the size of fear. He told me the children had no one. He said unused claims could support the mission. I changed dates. I sealed copies. I copied Miss Hart's hand from the school register. He looked at Eliza once and broke. I never knew what was under the chapel. Caleb shoved away from the aisle. Liar. Dust rose before anyone else moved. The coyote barely stood, ribs shaking, one leg half lifted, but he placed himself between Caleb and Ruth. Caleb stopped. Not because Dust could beat him, but because the whole room saw what he meant to do. Sheriff Cross drew his pistol. Caleb Rusk. Sit down. Caleb's hands opened. Vane looked around the hall then, and for the first time he seemed to understand that the room had escaped him. Still, he tried one last road. Mercy Bend, he said. You know me. You know what I built. If mistakes were made, they were made in service of children no one else would feed. Ruth lifted Rose's tag. You fed her number after you erased her name. No one spoke for him after that. Sheriff Cross removed the county seal from Edwin's folder and placed it beside Thomas's letter. These records are held for county review. Mr. Sallow, you will remain in town. Caleb Rusk, give me your weapon. Reverend Vane, you will not leave this hall. Vane smiled faintly. On what charge? Cross looked at the tables, the tin box, the 7 tags, the copied payments, the false confession, the flood note, and finally at Dust. For now, obstruction, theft of county records, forgery, and whatever County Attorney Miriam Vale names when she reads the copies already on the road. A breath moved through the hall. Not relief, not yet. Relief would have been too clean for what had been uncovered. Eliza sat down because her knees could not hold her. Ruth lowered herself beside Dust, and this time the coyote let her hand rest on his neck. By sunset, the mission gate stood open for the first time in 6 years. Not to welcome donors, not to collect prayers. Sheriff Cross posted men at the yard and sealed the chapel floor. Jonah's delivery boy had not yet returned, but the town no longer needed to pretend there was nothing to send. Eliza walked there after the crowd thinned. Ruth came with her. Dust followed at a distance, stopping often, refusing every hand that reached for him. At the gate, he lay down outside the threshold where the children had once fed him crusts through the drain. "He won't come in," Ruth said. "No," Eliza answered. He already did what he came to do. They buried nothing that night. There were still boards to lift, records to sort, families to find, and names to restore. Justice had arrived late, carrying dust on its boots and shame in its hands. It would not finish before morning. Eliza sat on the mission step and opened Rose's letter again. This time, she read the part she had not been able to read aloud. "Tell Ruth I kept the ribbon because it smelled like home. Tell Miss Hart I tried to write neat. Tell Mr. Thomas I remembered the numbers." Ruth covered her mouth. Eliza folded the letter with both hands. For years, she had believed she signed Rose away. Now she knew the signature had been stolen. That did not make the guilt vanish. It only gave it a proper name and a place to stand. She looked toward the yard, the chapel, the drain, and the coyote lying beyond the open gate. "Rosebell," she said quietly. Ruth said it after her. Then Jonah, standing by the path with his hat in his hands, said it too. One by one, as evening settled over Mercy Bend, the forgotten name returned to the air that had denied it. Dust laid his muzzle on his paws and closed his eyes. Not tame, not healed, only heard. And for that night, in a town that had mistaken silence for mercy, it was enough.